privileged to introduce Mirza Waheed here at the KLF. His first novel, The Collaborator, which was published, it was almost exactly a year ago. It's, I think, one of the finest debuts of last year, and you don't have to take my word for it. It was shortlisted for the highly prestigious Guardian First Book Award. And he was also picked by Waterstones, the biggest book chain in England, in the UK, as one of the debut novelists to look out for last year. So there was a great deal of anticipation, which was very nicely met by the novel. Waheed grew up in Srinagar, went to university in Delhi, and then has been working until recently in London at the BBC Urdu service. And The Collaborator is his first novel. It's a wonderful book. It's, I think, a book that, there are books that you read because they're fantastic novels as novels, in terms of writing, structure, character. And his book really delivers on all those counts. I think for people in Pakistan, it's also possibly a very useful thing to read, to set against the way in which Kashmir has become this place of rhetoric used by politicians, so that it almost ceases to be a real place. I remember in the 80s when you grew up, in the Zia years, there were always 3 newspaper stories. Someone in officialdom had cut a ribbon somewhere, the cricket team had done something, and a certain number of people had been killed by the Indian forces in Kashmir. And these just became numbers and statistics which were sort of meaningless, and you wrap them up in there goes Zia-ul-Haq and his PR machine. And it ceased to be real. And with Waheed's book, it becomes real, but it is a novel. It's not a history lesson. It's not a polemic. And it's a brilliant, beautiful novel about an unnamed narrator, the collaborator, although whether he really is a collaborator or not is a question that the book leaves for us to discover. And he is paid by the Indian forces to go down into the valley where there are corpses. And these are the boys who crossed the LOC to Pakistani training camps and were killed by the Indian forces as they were returning. And he's sent there not to get the corpses, but to get their ID cards and their weapons, which the Indian army will then use as it sees fit towards whatever propaganda purposes seem necessary. And it's a story of this young man, 18 years old, 19 years old, how he came into this position and why he is the only young man in the village. All the other boys of his age who he encounters are dead on that valley floor. And it's a heartbreaking novel as well as a very beautiful one. And Waheed is going to start things off with a reading from it. So please join me in welcoming Mirza Waheed.
Thank you for that wonderful intro, Kamla. Thank you all for coming. I've been feeling a bit wrecked. I haven't slept enough, probably 4 hours in the last 48 hours. And then there was this music, somebody started playing Dosti Hai, every time I would go to sleep, which wasn't really very friendly. But then, one has to live in these festivals and do what one can do. But the best part is I like reading from my novel. I quite like it, and I'm going to start towards the beginning of the story, where what Kamla described the novel. This boy is going down to this valley, which used to be his playground in his childhood. A postcard, pretty beautiful, typical Kashmir idyll. Where they used to play cricket and talk about everything and sing. But now that valley is turned into something quite dark and horrific, and this is the time he's going down to the valley for the first time in many years after his childhood. When I go down the first time after all these months, years, it is with a sense of both pressing nostalgia and fear. The valley looks like a large green sheet hung tenderly from the surrounding foothills, with a singing, humming is more like it, rivulet in the middle. It's still the same, a calm, largely uninhabited, solitary place nestled amidst the rings of our hills and mountains. In my childhood, it was very easy to ignore the Pakistani and Indian checkposts on either side. You forgot about them the moment you stepped on new, untouched, fresh from dry dew grass, and ran downhill for a few minutes before making generous boot marks. I liked long 8s and floral designs all over the place. They were far off, distant, almost unreal. And by the time we took off our clothes to splash about in the low and languid stream, we had assumed full ownership of the place and didn't care who was or wasn't peering at us from some ugly checkpost out there on the mountainside. After swimming in the chilly water, we would lie down on the thick carpet of grass for ages, looking at the really, really blue sky and conjuring up odd names for clouds that hung low over our valley before drifting to another one across the mountains. I spent a long time down there, perhaps all my childhood. I don't have a lot of other memories from those early days. Ma and Baba probably thought it best to let me spend all my time there, not venture out, stay safe inside the valley, so that I wouldn't clamor to move to the city when I grew up and be lost forever. In the years of my growing up, many border boys went to Sopore or Srinagar or other towns to study, and many refused to come back. Some of them ended up as bus conductors or worked as waiters in rickety restaurants on the national highway. Their parents' cattle herds dwindled with each passing year and brought poverty, loneliness, and ill health. I suppose my parents were scared too. In the years after I grew up, some of the boys either became guides and clandestinely scouted city boys across the border into training camps in Pakistan, or became militants themselves to relieve their parents of their yoke of shepherds' lives and give them proper homes when Kashmir would gain its independence. Many disappeared like that from time to time. I guess those who went to the city were luckier. My friends, all my friends, went away too. And God only knows if they will ever come back. Not many do, you see, and those who do don't live very long here, because the army people, the protectors of the land, have decided that there is only one way of dealing with the boys: catch and kill, catch and kill. I therefore ended up staying with my parents and their cattle. I stayed on in the valley, and in the end came to own it all by myself. I look at the first few corpses and I'm immediately horrified at the prospects of what my first ever job entails. There are probably 6 of them ahead of me, ugly grins, unbelievable, almost inhuman postures, and a grotesque intermingling of broken limbs make me dig my teeth deep and hard into my clenched fists. What an elaborate litter. There are bare wounds, holes dark and visceral, and limbless, armless, even headless torsos. A low moan struggles, screeches inside. Gradually, I approach one of the more intact bodies gingerly, eyes reduced to hairline slits, and look for a pocket or bag amidst all the dirt and the crusted blood on his clothes. I find the ID in his back pocket, and in some kind of limp, involuntary motion, throw it into the nylon army rucksack the captain gave me last week. It's not easy, collecting I-cards and whatever else you can find on dead bodies, bodies after bodies. Some huddled together, others forlorn and lonesome in various stages of decay. Wretched human remains lie on the green grass like cracked toys, teeth, shoes. For God knows how long, I just cannot remove my eyes from this landscape, heaps of them, big and small, belongings littered amidst the rubble of legs and arms, macabre, horrid ghouls on either side of the brook. Watch me from their melancholic black hole eye sockets. I guess whoever ended up in the stream was fortunate to be washed away. Carcasses with indefinable expressions on what remains of their faces. I hope I don't recognize anyone. This is what we get? They seem to ask. The smell, the smell, the smell. I cannot begin to describe what it is like the first time. You just stop breathing. That is it. The stench is so powerful that your guts begin to pull your throat down, sort of strangle you from within, if you know what I mean. On the first day, having touched my first ever corpse, I bathed twice in the evening with scalding hot water and a copious amount of soap, scrubbing and scratching myself into rashes and red nail slashes all over my chest and arms. I cannot eat well, however, owing to the nausea that comes over me for the next few days. It's not easy picking stuff off dead people. I think I'll read again later.
There's a line, can everyone hear me? Yes. There's a line there in what you just read. I just cannot remove my eyes from this landscape. And another place, there's a really haunting image of yellow flowers, which should be this really quite beautiful scene, except the yellow flowers are growing among and within the corpses, sort of outlining these corpses. And I wondered whether in some ways you were deliberately writing against this sort of pastoral idealization of the Kashmir landscape.
Not really deliberately. Somebody mentioned, as an aside, that the book is anti-pastoral. I didn't even know what that meant really in critical theory,
Right.
or something. But yes, it was inevitable for me to write about what it used to be like, which was, you have Kashmir is beautiful and everyone knows about it, and but what I didn't want to do was write about this beautiful place. I wanted to use that as just as a backdrop. The yellow flowers, I also remember there were 17 of them in some place. That was probably an obsession with young boys when they leave Kashmir to fight Indian Army. That's the age, 17, 18, and 19. The pastoral bits are in the past, and I had to talk about them because that's what childhood was like. This boy grows up in the mountains, in the most beautiful part in Kashmir, and that's what he used to do. Look at flowers, play cricket amidst the flowers, and swim in these really pristine waters. But then it changes; everything becomes dark, and I may have probably thought of this image, that this bright yellow swathes of color. And then now it's all dark and horrific, and I don't know if it worked.
It worked. Okay. I'm sure you get asked this all the time, but why is the hero unnamed, and do you know what his name is?
Oh yes, I have been asked that a number of
All the
times.
time, all the time.
On Twitter as well.
I'm so unoriginal. I probably read it on Twitter.
That why when I started writing, I just wrote in long sort of bursts because I had a full-time job, and midway I realized that the narrator doesn't have a name, and I thought, okay, let's give him a name, and I put names on this character, on this boy, and they didn't work. It was strange. It seemed imposed or false that he is Javed or Shahbaz Sharif or it didn't work. So I let it be. But I was still doubtful that is this a good thing to do, because as a debut novelist, you're not sure of what you're doing. You're not sure of your craft, definitely.
You're never sure.
You're never sure, okay. That's and then my editor at Penguin, who's very brilliant and wonderful, Mary, she didn't mind it. She said, it's fine. It works, fine. And what I was unsure about, though, because you asked, I didn't want this to be an everyman, kind of device, because I find that boring and slightly, cliched. But people said, no, he's not really an everyman, and he doesn't really need a name. I did try names, none of them worked. He was called Raja at one point, which seemed so Bollywood that I thought, okay, let's drop this one as well.
How did it start, the novel?
You mean the writing, or?
Well, do you remember sort of where the originating idea came from? Was it a single image? Was it a time period you wanted to write about?
It was an image. It was an image, and part of it was an image from a real incident. I mentioned it everywhere and talked about it. When you grow up in Kashmir in the 90s, you're a teenager, you see this kind of stuff every day. It's quite ordinary, actually. There is nothing dramatically tragic about it, because this is what happens. This is what you do. You go to school, college, and you see stuff happens on the road, and you go home, and then you begin to play games about how many were killed, how many injured, and what kind of weapons were used, and was it a machine gun or a Kalashnikov or things like that. It's quite banal. But one image had stuck in my mind from my teenage, and it stayed with me forever, for nearly 20 years, which was in my neighborhood. There was an encounter or a battle between the army and the boys, as we used to call them. And the next day we were taken to a place in the neighborhood where they do an ID parade, and you're made to sit on a, in an open space for a day, sometimes days. And we were, asked to go to this open ground, and I actually saw bodies lying somewhere, just lying around there, and one of them wasn't dead, and I've written about this, in some place, and he wanted water, and when you're young and you couldn't stop, that would be very silly. You might get killed, hit definitely, if you stop to check what it is. You have to walk in a straight line and go where you're asked to sit. But that image stayed in my mind, that how has this place, become this, that there are people on the road, just, young people who are dying dead, and you're expected to behave normally. And you're asked to not to say anything about it. And that's what we did, all of us. And that wasn't something which was unusual or extraordinary. That's happened. That used to happen, everything. But this image came back. It stayed with me for years, and I could never. I was obsessed with it. That how does this happen? How does violence become so banal? And how do we get used to that kind of thing? But I couldn't write about it. I couldn't write about it for a long time, because you're growing up, you're a teenager, you don't know really what's happened. You take time to process what's happened, and one of the things, one of the ways you can deal with that is I discovered, is silence. You just don't do anything, don't say anything, until a few years ago this image came back, and I then thought I should write about it. Then I just transported that small image to a bigger theater in the mountains, which is, the village is fictional, the valley is fictional, and then carried on writing. And then I wanted to examine what happens in this place if brutality and violence and is the order of the day, or in the case of the other character in the book, is a job. You're paid to make a score every day. That this is your job, to kill as many people as possible. So I wanted to examine that. What is inside the mind of that man as well, who does the killing? Right. How does he deal with it, and what does he become? So I carried on writing, and then tried to make sense of what I'd written.
Most of the relationships that our narrator had are in fact in the past. Through his childhood we hear about the friendships with these boys who later cross over. In the present day, the primary relationship, and I use that term loosely, is with the Indian captain, Kadia. How much did you have to think or wrestle with the idea of how much you wanted him to be just seen as a uniform? How much you wanted, sort of, who is this man to come through?
I actually did think about this character quite a bit, and I then decided not to make this character, what is called in the old-fashioned world of literature a round character, which I find a completely silly concept, because this is Foster, of course, and I thought about that in the real world, a person like this, in that place in Kashmir, when he's posted on a job, on an assignment, he's not going to have a life there. So I can fictionalize, I can, invent a device or two, throw a flashback, and give him a wonderful family life and children, and backstory with cricket and everything. But that seemed false. That because if this person does this job, that's all he does. There's nothing else. I did run the risk, and some review also mentioned it, that it may appear as a cardboard character, and I wanted to say, but that was the point, actually. I don't know if I was successful in that. That was the point, that this person cannot have a life beyond being a cardboard figure, because they don't carry their lives. Soldiers anywhere in the world, in Pakistan, when they are engaging with militants in parts of Pakistan, they don't carry their lives or their essential being so to speak, to this place. So I decided that this person is not going to have, a huge backstory, or and also because he had to be seen in contrast with the boy, who belongs to that place, and this other character doesn't. He just somebody suggested that could you have possibly humanized this character, and I said, why would I want to humanize an evil character in that fictional world? I didn't want to humanize him because I was trying to portray something. And I mean, yes, he is human after all. He's a person who has a job, who does this. So I gave him a little bit of, he drinks a lot. That was the laziest thing I could do. That he should just drink away.
But there's also a wonderful moment, without giving anything away, I hope, quite late when your narrator sees him listening to Muhammad Rafi songs, and it's disturbing in some ways to the narrator because,
it's the same music that the narrator is fond of, or more specifically, his best friend used to sing Muhammad Rafi a lot, and which, I mean, now coming back to this other character, then there are possibilities that he does listen to music, and same kind of music. But then, in that sphere, in that context, these are completely different people. I think it was also a moment for the narrator to have, to get a glimpse into this person's, his oppressor's life, that he could, during the day he does all kinds of nasty things, evil things. In the evening he listens to melodramatic, slightly cheap songs, and next day he goes back to his killing field. I thought that was quite realistic. As for me, it was quite realistic that this person will do that. He will go and kill 30 odd intruders tomorrow, and then in the evening he will open his bottle of VAT 69 or Old Monk. That's what the army supplies to its cadre in India. I don't know what they do in Pakistan.
Ruabza.
And no, the Murray Brewery is quite close. So yeah, I thought that was quite.
Get into trouble.
It was quite realistic that this person will do that.
I'm going to now ask you the other question, which you get asked all the time, but maybe with a twist in it, which is this question of non-fiction, fiction. You were a journalist for many years. There was an interview recently with Jonathan Safran Foer. And the interviewer, who's also a novelist, Nathan Englander, said something about, you wrote about 9/11 so soon after it happened, and, other people weren't. And Jonathan Safran Foer replies, well, journalists were writing about it the day it happened, so let's not make a big deal about a novelist writing about it 2 years later. But then he also went on, again, talking about the difference between, in some ways, fiction and non-fiction. He says, the price paid by bad journalism is that we went to war, as in the Iraq War. Right? But if a novelist gets it wrong, what's the price? A bad novel. It's not the end of the world. I imagine he's being slightly tongue-in-cheek there, but there is a sort of thing that the novel bears less responsibility. And I want to take that statement and then place against something you once said, which was that I can't go to the LOC, so I have to imagine it. So can you talk a little about writing this as fiction? Writing a story of Kashmir as fiction. What does fiction offer you that non-fiction doesn't?
I did briefly contemplate writing non-fiction about my time and life in Kashmir, but it required a lot of research, and I thought that's a lot of work.
Yes.
And
It's because you worked with Muhammad Hanif for so long. Go the lazy way.
And I decided to. I think invention was a more tempting and less sort of strenuous, demanding prospect. So I just started inventing things, and of course there's some sort of real incidents do crop up in the novel. I don't know what we were talking about, fiction versus non-fiction.
And also Jonathan Safran Foer's contention that non-fiction writers have much more responsibility, because a journalist can influence things and and fiction writers don't? I mean, is this
We have a lot of
relevant?
responsibilities, seriously. I don't
Too much.
agree with, I have to write a second novel and the third one and the fourth one.
right.
That's a lot of work and responsibility. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, non-fiction obviously operates in different ways. That the whole transaction, the agreement with the reader, the contract with the reader is completely different. You're being told by the non-fiction writer that I'm going to give you this version of history or an issue based on my research, and there's going to be facts and everything. Whereas with the contract with the reader of fiction is completely different.
Yeah.
You're telling them I'm going to give you a story which you're going to like or dislike, and in the process I'm going to talk about the things that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
When I was writing this novel, I think there was a part of me that wanted to write a novel set in Kashmir in the time I lived there, which Doris Lessing probably once said that she was asked about her political work, novel fiction, and she said, if I didn't write this, people will say it didn't happen. So I don't know what Saffron Ford is saying there, that I would like to believe that the novel will stay there longer, and more people will read it, and than a hasty, bad op-ed, or
How about a good op-ed? Even a good op-ed.
once a year. I
Right.
think that's
Okay. But of course, what does happen, and I think we need to touch on this, is when your novel enters the world. There are some novels that enter the world and are just regarded as novels and works of fiction and works of literature. You write a novel about Kashmir, and it's going to enter the world slightly differently, at least in India. One of the weirdest reviews I've ever read was Shashi Tharoor reviewing The Collaborator. Tharoor, of course, is a Congress politician. He's also written novels. And I've never seen a review in which the reviewer so deeply admires the novel and just isn't able to come to grips with his admiration. So there's all this, it's fantastic, it's brilliant. I completely disagree with what he's saying. It's wonderful, he's marvelous, he's a genius, and he's got it all wrong. And it was, I think that should be framed as just weird review of the year, but also possibly pointing to something that this novel may have done when it entered the lives of people reading it. And can you talk a little about the response it received in India?
I thought it was quite well received, which was slightly surprising. I had thought, and a couple of friends had thought, some people may go after it and go after me or something. But people read it as fiction and thought it was nice and fine. It gives you a glimpse of what happens in Kashmir and everything. The review you're talking about I don't know, I think I can talk about it now. I don't usually talk, one shouldn't talk about reviewers and reviews, It felt like the review by the government of India. It was a ministerial review, I called it. And as you said, there was some, you are going to get me into India bashing in Pakistan. My wife is never going to get a visa.
No one reported this. All you tweeters stop. We have to allow his wife to be able to go to India.
And it was silly, I thought, because I would have expected, you just, tear into the book and, point to its many flaws and then say this is bad. To say that, I like this book, but I reject it, I still haven't understood that statement. Neither have I understood when somebody says that there are no sympathetic Christian characters in this novel, or sympathetic Hindu characters. I didn't think I was, even for a debut novelist, I didn't think I was writing by a quota. And which was, but coming back on a more serious note, I thought it was well received in India, which was quite good, because there is a conversation happening in India about Kashmir in more meaningful ways than ever, which is, in some circles, definitely in Delhi and other big centers, people are reading about Kashmir and want to see Kashmir with some empathy, which and understanding, which didn't happen for 20 years, which made some of us quite angry, that there's this war in your backyard, which you claim is an integral part, and it's an hour's flight from Delhi. And for 20 years, you did not, some sections of the press and of course the state did not want people to know what goes on. And they succeeded in it, which was quite disturbing. But that's changing now. Thanks to literary festivals in India, they have one every month or week, and a lot of Kashmiris also get invited, and they talk about their books and prison diaries and everything. But people are listening in India, and apart from the government.
Apart from the government, they'll get there, hopefully. Of course, the other wonderful book that's come out of Kashmir recently is Basharat Pir's Curfew Night, which is a work of non-fiction. And in it, Basharat writes about how when he was growing up, when he was at university, walking into bookstores in Delhi and feeling ashamed about the unwritten books of the Kashmir experience. That in Delhi you could find books about Bosnia, but you couldn't find books about Kashmir. And he does talk about the one exception to that, which was Agha Shahid Ali. Will you talk a little about what Shahid meant, and whether you, like Basharat, had this feeling when you were in Delhi, or where are the books on Kashmir, that there was a space in the bookshelf that needed to be filled?
Definitely. I mean, it does cross your mind that where are the books on Kashmir and everything. But I don't think I wanted to write a novel because there wasn't a novel on Kashmir.
Right.
That there has to be a novel on Kashmir, so let me do it. I actually wanted to write this. Not to have it on bookshelves in the Kashmir corner. Shahid, I mean, we grow up with Shahid in Kashmir. Everyone reads Agha Shahid. If you grow up in Kashmir, everyone reads Agha Shahid, and from a young age. And he speaks to you like nobody does. If you're growing up in that time, 90s, late 90s, and then you immediately know what Shahid is talking about. He goes to the very core of the Kashmiri experience of the 90s, and in such wonderful, beautiful. Everyone should read Agha Shahid. Veiled Sweet is his collected works, which has almost everything he wrote. So I read Shahid as well. I remember the first time I read Shahid was somebody had photocopied Country Without a Post Office for me. And it was wonderful. It was a great moment. I was in Delhi and I read this photocopied version of, and it was I had a very strong reaction. It was beautiful, and yet it disturbs you a lot. Because you're immediately reminded of everything back home and everything, and especially when you're a, slightly soppy teenager in Delhi, and given to sentimental stuff. So it sort of immediately you know what he's saying, and then you read everything that Shahid writes, and then you also discover that everyone in my generation grew up reading Agha Shahid. So he is, as Amitabh Ghosh said in his very nice essay, he comes closest to being Kashmir's national poet.
But apparently we are short on time, so I'm going to open it up to questions from the floor. And there's a mic going around, so if you could raise a hand. Gentleman in the back.
My question is there such a thing as turning the book into a movie, and if not, how would you feel about it? Is it needed to begin with, and how would you like to see it on the screen?
This novel.
This novel.
They have been banning Kashmir films, 3 of them in the last few months. One wasn't given a censor certificate. The big film, Sanjay Kak's film, they didn't allow a screening of it in a university. And there is a third one which the director chose not to go through the censors or a release, just uploaded it on YouTube and made it available for free. So so I don't know. Yes, I mean, if somebody wants to make a film, as long as they give me some money and don't put it on YouTube for free. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if how they approach novels and see what is worth filming and what isn't. I don't know how they make those decisions.
part of what I was alluding to was the fact that it might have a bigger audience and be more aware through this medium, because a lot of people just don't read anymore.
Yeah, they don't read anymore. But they should read. No, I mean, it would be wonderful if somebody makes a good film based on a novel.
So we had a question back there.
I just wanted to know, because this story is set among the minority Gujar community, it's not in the mainstream Kashmiri society. Is there any special reason for that?
I didn't have a deliberate design in mind when I set it in a minority community. But because the novel is set on the border, and those areas are inhabited by these tribes or former, nomadic tribes, and their boys used to actually, in real life, used to be guides for boys going across to Pakistan to train. But then I was aware of the context, that this is a minority within a oppressed population, and what is the relationship they have with the majority community. And I've touched upon it briefly, that on the one hand there is this majority Muslim community up in arms against Indian rule in Kashmir, but they also have to look at their own differences in the larger context of Kashmir's ethnic makeup and things like that. But as I said, you didn't want it to become a history lesson or anthropology or all those things. But I was aware of this, that I quite liked it to set it in the Gujar community.
The gentleman there.
I wanted to ask you and Basharat, after your books were released, I think you got a good response from the audience in Kashmir, in the sense that you are recording the history of last 20 years. Do you see this continuing, or in one sense more records like this happening because of something that began the process? What's your view on that?
I want to say this, that people wrote in Kashmir before Basharat and I and other people started writing. We have a very long, rich tradition in poetry, going back centuries, to Lala Ded, and then Haba Khatun, and then other Kashmiri poets, Mahjoor and Ghani Kashmiri, and they were major writers and poets, and also in prose and fiction in Kashmiri and Urdu and Hindi and in Persian. Ghani Kashmiri wrote poetry in Persian. So people have always written, This just happens to be because they're published in English and then they get a bit of notice outside Kashmir. What it can do, what it has probably done, I know a lot of people who are already writing, who are at work on novels and poetry collections and short story collections, at least 10, 12 of them, which is wonderful. The more, the better.
And one final question.
Thank you very much. Mirza, I think Kashmir is kind of a topic that's quite explosive at both the sides of the border. As a matter of curiosity, I think Kashmiris are the ones who have suffered most, and they continue to suffer. They have suffered for the last 60 years almost, and the way things are going, without adding my opinion, I wanted to hear yours about the political dimension of a solution. Would there be one? Would there ever be a time when both sides start looking at this thing with sanity and with some kind of a...
sanity from, governments. No, on a serious note, the only way you can try to resolve Kashmir is both the countries have to demilitarize. Nothing else can happen. They've tried everything. 60 years. They've tried everything, and they haven't changed much in their stances and everything, and which means nothing can come out of that. And it hasn't come out. So both the countries, and I do believe this, that no part of Kashmir is Azad. And both the states have to demilitarize. That's what I think personally, for anything concrete, meaningful to happen in Kashmir, because everything else they already tried. It hasn't worked. India has tried a brutal crackdown on the insurgency, and then even it continues now. somebody was killed today, or yesterday, by the army. And Pakistan tried to do something in the 90s by pushing its own agenda in Kashmir. That didn't work. So which leaves us with the same old story. And unless, as I said, they have to, the armies have to leave civilian areas. They have to get out and then be somewhere on the borders. Then we can have a meaningful conversation, and where Kashmiris are the primary consultants and party. Because everything else has been tried, hasn't worked. That's a short answer.
Thank you for that. And for those of you who are interested in continuing on that part of the conversation, Waheed will be on a Kashmir panel tomorrow. So
In the morning.
In the morning, so be here in the morning. Again, I'm sorry this is a truncated session. Waheed will be signing copies of his book at the book signing stall, which is next in the garden next to all the book selling. And thank you, and thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We should now go to the book signing. And all of you should buy the book and buy it for your friends and relatives.